Soccer feels like such a strange game to come back to after all this time. The original Famicom release was only about a year old when this Disk System version came out. And on the Famicom, it took a very long time for any other action-based soccer games to show up. I'm just gonna skip over Captain Tsubasa right now. However, thanks to the advent of a Japanese soccer league in the early 90s, the end of the Famicom's life was jam-packed with soccer. And most of the soccer games that came out weren't much better than this. Turns out it's pretty difficult to do soccer on an 8-bit console. Who would have guessed? Just like all of these launch titles, Soccer is just a straight copy of the existing cartridge for the Famicom. It doesn't even take up the full side of a disc. One consequence of that with these early Disk System games is that it wasn't uncommon for people to take these discs and then write a completely different game to the opposite side. It had to be a single-sided game, of course, which usually meant one of these Famicom transplants, but it was a way to stretch your gaming dollar, or yen in this case. Soccer has exactly one game mode, a single exhibition match, and you can pick between the national teams of 7 countries. The only difference between any of them is the uniform color. There's also 5 difficulty levels, and you can set how long you want the game to be. On the field, you've got 6 players per team, and I'm including the goalie in that total. In this footage, I was playing on level 1 and level 2 difficulty. I probably should have turned it up to level 3, but it was soccer. As you play, you're controlling the person with the number over their head, and if you have the ball, then B will pass to another player on your team, while A will kick the ball in the direction you're facing. And if you don't have the ball, then B can rotate control to another player on your team, assuming there's one in the general direction that you're facing. And that's really all the special moves you have. There's no special commands to try to steal the ball. Players just bunch up on top of the ball, and eventually someone will make it move. Besides the player that you're controlling, you're also constantly steering the goalie around. And pressing up and down will move an arrow that shows where you're aiming at the opponent's goal. So you have to control both the active player and those at the same time. Generally speaking, it's easier to handle the goalie with this because if the ball gets down there, you're probably ignoring your active player and just moving the goalie around. And for the arrow, it rolls up and down the goal a lot faster than you move. If you're playing on one of the lower difficulty levels, your computer opponents will sometimes just freeze in place and not do anything for a bit. That's one way to make it easier on the player, I guess. So how does soccer feel as a, well, soccer game? At the very least, it's recognizable as soccer. I know that sounds like I'm damning it with faint praise, but for a console game at this point, that was not a guarantee. I don't like how there isn't really any ball control in the game. Yeah, if you keep walking in the same direction, then you'll dribble down the field, but there's no real sense of possession. It feels more like you're making little baby kicks. The pitch is also a bit undersized, but that one I don't mind as much. It's scaled appropriately for the game. If you had 11 players on the field, it would be way too crowded. You've got a small number of very large players, so the smaller scale feels right. Would I play soccer again? No, of course not, it's soccer. It's an 8-bit sports game that's severely limited and whose controls don't feel very good. You're not going to find many people wanting to go back to this one. But for the time it was released, even up through this 1986 re-release on the Disk System, this was about as good as you were going to get from a soccer video game. That's not really a compliment, but it's as close as I'm going to get to one.